Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we tackle the really dense source material, the statutes, the regulations, the codes, and break it all down into the essential knowledge you need.
And today, we're diving into something pretty hefty.
Yeah, we are wrestling with a foundational piece of criminal law, the Texas Penal Code, specifically Chapter 22. It covers assaultive offenses.
It's incredibly layered, this chapter. It goes way beyond just, hitting someone. It defines this whole complex structure of intentional acts, threats, recklessness, everything the state punishes as assault.
Exactly. And that's our mission today for you, the listener. We're not just skimming the surface definitions you might hear on the news.
No, definitely not.
We're going deep into this statutory maze. We want to show you the specific mechanics, the things that make an assault more serious, like who the victim is, the specific actions taken, the mental state involved.
All those factors that can turn what seems like a minor incident into a major felony charge in Texas.
You'll walk away understanding how context is everything in this area of law.
Absolutely. That transformation, that escalation, is really the core of Chapter 22.
Yeah.
We'll look at how the victim's identity, if they're a child, say, or a police officer, or a family member, or the specific way the assault happens, like using a weapon or critically choking someone.
How those things act like multipliers.
But precisely.
Yeah.
They can boost a charge from a simple misdemeanor right up to serious state prison time.
Okay, before we really get into the thick of it, just a quick but honestly really important note for you listening. We put a lot of work into these deep dives, and we really rely on your support to keep them going. If you find this kind of detailed breakdown valuable, please take a second right now and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps the channel grow.
It really does. And if you want to see the source material itself, the actual penal code chapter we're discussing.
Yeah, head over to our website. We'll have links there for you.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the absolute fundamental definition of assault.
Right. So to get the whole picture of Chapter 22, we have to start at the beginning, Section 22.01. This defines what assault even means in the eyes of Texas law.
And it's broader than most people probably think.
Much broader. It's not just about physical blows.
And I think maybe the most crucial thing to grasp right off the bat is the mental state requirement. Lawyers call it mens rea.
Yes, the intent behind the action.
For any kind of assault under this chapter, the person had to act intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. Those are the key words.
That's exactly right. And Section 22.01a, the core part, lays out 3 distinct ways someone can commit assault. It depends on what they actually did.
Okay, so the first one, this is probably the one people think of most often. It's basically physical battery, causing bodily injury. That's Section 22.01a1.
Right. Intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing bodily injury to someone else.
And we need to be clear about bodily injury, right? It doesn't have to be like a stab wound or a broken bone.
Yeah, not at all. Under Texas law, bodily injury is defined as physical pain, illness, or any impairment of physical condition.
So a slap that stings, a hard shove that causes pain for a second.
Yep, that qualifies. Even minor scrapes, bruises. If it causes pain, it meets the definition. The legal threshold is, well, surprisingly low for bodily injury.
It's also interesting how the law specifically says this applies to another person, including the person's spouse.
Yeah, that wording seems a bit redundant on the surface.
But it's there for a reason, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a very deliberate legislative statement. It hammers home the point that being married or in a dating relationship is absolutely not a defense. You can't assault your spouse and claim immunity because of the relationship.
Okay, so that's causing injury. What's the second way?
The second way shifts away from actual physical contact. It's threatening imminent bodily injury. Section 22.01a2.
And here the mental state is different, right?
It is. It's stricter. For a threat to count as assault, the person has to act intentionally or knowingly. Just being reckless isn't enough here.
That's fascinating. So the crime happens the moment you make the threat and the other person feels threatened?
Essentially, yes. You don't have to actually touch them. If you intended or you knew that your words or your actions, like, say, shaking your fist and lunging towards someone, would put them in fear of getting hurt right then, that's assault.
The harm is the fear itself, the psychological impact.
Exactly. The fear of imminent harm.
Okay, and the third type. This one seems like it covers even less intense situations.
It does. It's offensive or provocative contact. Section 22.01a3. Again, this requires intent or knowledge.
So what kind of contact are we talking about here?
It's intentionally or knowingly causing physical contact with someone when you know, or you reasonably should know, that they'll find that contact offensive or provocative.
So not like accidentally bumping someone on a crowded bus.
No, no, this is deliberate. Think about things like spitting on someone,
Mm-hmm.
or aggressively grabbing their shirt, or maybe poking someone insistently in the chest to provoke them.
It's not about causing pain, necessarily.
Right. It's about the offensive nature of the unwanted, deliberate physical contact. It's meant to anger or demean the person.
Okay, so those are the three pillars: causing injury, threatening injury, and offensive contact. Now, how does the law punish these initially? What's the baseline?
The grading. This is super important for understanding everything that comes next. This sets the starting point before any aggravating factors kick in.
Let's lay it out clearly. If the assault involves actually causing bodily injury, that first category, 22.01A1, what's the starting charge?
That starts as a Class A misdemeanor.
And a Class A misdemeanor, that's the most serious type of misdemeanor, right?
It is. Practically speaking, a conviction could mean up to a year in county jail, plus a fine of up to $4,000. It's a serious criminal record, potential jail time, not minor.
Okay. Now compare that to the other two types, the threat to or the offensive contact, A3.
Those start much lower. They are initially graded as a Class C misdemeanor.
Class C, that's the lowest level offense in Texas, usually like a traffic ticket, right? Fine only.
Generally, yes. The maximum penalty is typically just a fine, usually of up to $500, no jail time attached at that base level.
So the law makes a big distinction right away. Actual physical pain, even minor, pushes it to a Class A. Fear or offensive touch starts way down at Class C.
That's a key philosophical point in the code. Bodily injury itself is treated more seriously from the get-go, at least until we start adding other factors.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The base level offense is just the starting point.
Indeed, that Class A or Class C misdemeanor, that's just the floor. Sections 22.01B and C are all about how things escalate.
Right, this is where the context really matters. Who the victim is or how exactly the assault happened can instantly bump the charge way up.
Often bypassing the misdemeanor levels entirely and jumping straight into felony territory.
And you can really see the legislative intent here, can't you? It seems geared towards protecting specific groups, people considered vulnerable or people essential for society to function.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Targeting certain individuals often turns that basic Class A misdemeanor assault, the one causing bodily injury, into an immediate felony of the third degree.
Okay, let's list some of these protected groups. Who gets this heightened protection?
Well, a big category is public servants. But there's a condition.
They have to be doing their job.
Right. Assaulting a public servant while they are lawfully discharging an official duty. Or, and this is important, assaulting them in retaliation for performing their duty.
And public servant isn't just police officers, is it?
No, it's broader. The felony enhancement also applies to security officers, both commissioned and non-commissioned.
Okay.
It covers emergency services personnel, think firefighters, EMS crews, also hospital personnel, specifically including emergency room staff if the assault happens while they're working on hospital property.
So people in those critical care and emergency role.
Exactly. And the law also protects people involved in keeping things running, like utility workers performing their service duties and process servers.
Process servers, that always strikes me as interesting. They're put on a similar level of protection as police or firefighters here.
It shows a strong intent to protect the basic functions of the legal system. You need people to be able to serve court papers without fear of being attacked for it.
Makes sense. Now, how does the prosecution prove the attacker knew the victim was, say, an EMT or a security guard?
That's where a very useful legal tool comes in. It's called the visual cue presumption, found in section 22.01 PND.
A presumption. How does that work?
It means if the victim was wearing a distinctive uniform, or maybe a badge, that clearly indicated their job or status.
Like an EMS uniform or a security guard's badge.
Precisely. If they were wearing that, the law presumes the person who assaulted them knew their status.
So the prosecution doesn't necessarily have to prove the attacker's specific knowledge. The uniform creates the presumption.
Right. It shifts the burden, making it much easier to establish that mental state needed for the felony enhancement. The defendant would have to actively rebut that presumption.
Okay, so that covers protected professionals. What about escalations based on relationships? Domestic violence situations?
This is where we see some of the most significant penalty increases. The law takes family violence extremely seriously.
So assaulting a family member or someone you live with or someone you're dating.
Yes, using the definitions from the Texas Penal Code for those relationships. If someone commits assault against one of those individuals, and they already have a prior conviction for certain domestic violence offenses or related crimes like sexual assault or continuous violence against the family,
Then the new assault charge gets bumped up.
immediately it becomes a third-degree felony under Section 22.01b2. The law comes down hard on repeat family violence offenders.
But even without a prior record, there's a specific type of assault in these relationships that triggers a huge jump in penalty, right?
Yes, and this is arguably one of the most critical recent additions to this law: impeding breathing or circulation, commonly known as choking or strangulation.
Found in Section 22.01b2.
That's the one. If an assault against a family member, household member, or dating partner involves intentionally, knowingly, or even recklessly impeding their normal breathing or blood circulation.
Oh, like putting pressure on their throat or neck, or covering their mouth and nose.
Exactly. If the assault involves that specific action, choking or strangulation, it doesn't matter if there's a prior conviction. That act alone makes the assault an automatic third-degree felony.
Wow. Why such a drastic jump for that specific action?
Well, extensive research, both sociological and medical, shows a terrifying link. Non-fatal strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of a future domestic homicide.
So the legislature is trying to intervene early at a really high-risk point.
Precisely. They recognize that choking isn't just about causing pain. It's often about asserting terrifying control, demonstrating the power to kill. It makes the victim incredibly vulnerable, and it's a huge red flag for future lethal violence. So the law treats it with extreme severity right away.
And it can get even worse, right, if you combine choking with a prior record.
It does. If someone commits assault by impeding breathing, and they also have that qualifying prior family violence conviction we talked about,
Then what happens?
then the charge escalates again. It becomes a felony of the second degree under Section 22.01b3.
Let's put that in context. Third-degree felony is what range?
2 to 10 years in state prison, plus a potential $10,000 fine.
And second degree?
That bumps the range up to 2 to 20 years in prison. The law is sending a very clear message. Family violence involving choking, especially by repeat offenders, warrants significant prison time.
Okay. Are there other vulnerable groups that trigger felony charges?
Yes. Assaulting someone the actor knows is pregnant at the time. That's also a third-degree felony. This protects both the pregnant person and the potential life.
Right. And there's a specific provision about forcing an abortion.
There is. If the assault is done specifically to coerce or force a pregnant person to have an abortion against their will.
Whether they wanted one or not.
Right. The crime is the coercion through violence. If that assault causes bodily injury, it's a third-degree felony. If it was just the threat or offensive contact part, it's a Class A misdemeanor. But the specific intent to force that decision is targeted.
And finally, back to public servants. What's the absolute highest jump for a simple assault?
The biggest leap happens if the victor is a peace officer or a judge.
Okay.
If someone commits assault causing bodily injury against a peace officer or judge while they're performing their official duties or in retaliation for it, that Class A misdemeanor doesn't just become a third-degree felony.
It goes higher.
It jumps straight to a second-degree felony.
2
to 20 years potential prison time. That really underscores the state's priority in protecting law enforcement and the judiciary.
Okay, so we've covered simple assault and how it escalates based on the victim or specific actions like choking. Now we move up another level entirely.
Right, to aggravated assault, which is defined in Section 22.02.
What makes an assault aggravated? It's not just about who the victim is anymore, right?
Correct. Aggravated assault is distinguished by two key factors related to the severity of the harm caused or the means used to cause it.
Okay, factor number 1.
Causing serious bodily injury. We need to pause here because serious bodily injury, or SBI, is legally very different from the basic bodily injury we talked about for simple assault.
Right. Bodily injury was just physical pain, illness, or impairment. What makes it serious bodily injury?
SBI is defined as an injury that creates a substantial risk of death. That's the first part.
Okay, life-threatening.
Or it's an injury that causes serious permanent disfigurement, or it causes protracted loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ.
So we're talking about things like losing an eye, permanent paralysis, severe burns causing disfigurement, brain damage, things with lasting severe consequences or that nearly cause death.
Exactly. A broken arm might just be bodily injury. But if that broken arm needs multiple surgeries and results in permanent nerve damage and loss of use, that could be SBI. The key difference is the severity, the permanence, the proximity to death.
Okay, that's causing SBI. What's factor number 2 for aggravated assault?
Using or exhibiting a deadly weapon during the assault.
Using or exhibiting. That's important.
Critically important. You don't actually have to use the weapon to injure someone. Just showing it, exhibiting it, while committing an assault is enough to elevate the charge to aggravated assault.
And what counts as a deadly weapon? Is it just guns and knives?
No, the definition is much broader. It includes anything specifically designed or made to inflict death or SBI, like a firearm or certain knives.
Okay.
But it also includes anything that, in the way it's used or intended to be used, is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury.
So everyday objects can become deadly weapons legally?
Absolutely. A baseball bat swung at someone's head, a car driven towards a pedestrian, even a shod foot used to stomp on someone's head could potentially qualify as a deadly weapon in the manner of its use. It depends entirely on the circumstances and how the object was wielded.
So let's say I just shove someone, which would normally be a low-level Class C misdemeanor if it's just offensive contact. But if I do that shove while holding up a knife and threatening them...
Even if you never cut them with the knife, that shove plus exhibiting the deadly weapon instantly becomes aggravated assault.
Wow. The weapon changes everything. So what's the penalty for aggravated assault generally?
The baseline punishment for aggravated assault is a felony of the second degree. Remember, that's 2 to 20 years in prison.
But knowing Chapter 22, I bet there are ways it can get even worse.
You bet correctly. Certain circumstances can push aggravated assault up to the highest non-capital offense level, a felony of the first degree.
First degree, that's 5 to 99 years, or life in prison. What triggers that?
Several scenarios. One involves severe domestic violence. If the actor commits aggravated assault using a deadly weapon and causes serious bodily injury, and the victim is a family member or household member.
So combining SBI, a deadly weapon, and the domestic relationship context.
Right. The law views that combination as exceptionally egregious.
What else triggers first degree?
Another trigger focuses on the outcome of the injury. If the aggravated assault causes a traumatic brain injury or a spine injury that results in a persistent vegetative state or irreversible paralysis.
Again, focusing on those absolutely devastating permanent outcomes.
Exactly. The law reflects the profound loss of function caused by such injuries.
Does the victim's status play a role here too?
It does. Aggravated assault becomes a first-degree felony if it's committed against certain protected individuals, public servants, security officers, process servers, while they're on duty, if it involves SBI or a deadly weapon.
And what about protecting the justice system itself, like witnesses?
Yes, that's another first-degree trigger.
What?
Committing aggravated assault against someone in retaliation for their service as a witness, a prospective witness, or an informant.
So trying to intimidate or punish someone for cooperating with law enforcement.
The law strongly protects against that to ensure the integrity of the judicial process.
Any other first-degree triggers?
Yes, there's a specific mention reflecting concerns about mass violence. Committing aggravated assault as part of what the statute refers to as mass shooting also elevates it to a first-degree felony.
Okay. That covers direct assaults, severe injuries, and weapons. But Chapter 22 also deals with situations where maybe the intent wasn't necessarily to injure, but the behavior was just incredibly dangerous.
Right. That brings us to deadly conduct, Section 22.05. This offense focuses more on the risk created by someone's actions, rather than a guaranteed injury.
So what's the basic definition?
The baseline offense is recklessly engaging in conduct that places another person in imminent danger of serious bodily injury, just creating that immediate risk through recklessness.
And the penalty for that baseline?
That starts as a Class A misdemeanor. 1 year in jail max, $4,000 fine max.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine someone doing donuts in their car in a crowded parking lot, forcing people to jump out of the way. Even if nobody gets hit, that reckless driving clearly put others in imminent danger of SBI. That could be deadly conduct.
Got it. But I assume firearms changed the game here, too.
Drastically. There's a much more serious form of deadly conduct defined in the statute.
Which is?
If a person knowingly discharges a firearm at or in the direction of one or more individuals, or if they knowingly discharge a firearm at a home, a building, or a vehicle, and they are reckless about whether it's occupied or not.
So shooting at people or shooting at buildings or cars without checking if someone's inside.
Exactly. That specific conduct, knowingly discharging a firearm in those circumstances, is not a misdemeanor. It's immediately a felony of the third degree.
That's a huge jump from the Class A for general reckless endangerment.
It shows a clear legislative focus on the inherent danger and irresponsibility of discharging firearms inappropriately, especially near places where people are likely to be.
And there's a presumption related to pointing guns, too, isn't there?
Yes, another powerful legal presumption in Section 22.05c. It states that recklessness and danger, the elements needed for deadly conduct, are presumed if the actor knowingly pointed a firearm at or in the direction of another person.
Even if they thought the gun was unloaded.
Even then, the law basically says we don't care if you thought it was unloaded. Pointing a firearm at someone is inherently reckless and dangerous conduct, full stop. Claiming you didn't think it would fire is generally not a defense.
Is there an exception?
Yes, there's an explicit exception carved out for peace officers acting in the lawful discharge of their official duties. But for civilians, pointing a gun creates that presumption of deadly conduct. Right, now we shift focus to sections specifically designed to shield society's most vulnerable members. This brings us to Section 22.04, injury to a child, elderly, or disabled individual.
This section looks really complex. It seems to mix different levels of intent with different levels of harm caused.
It is complex. It uses 4 different mental states: intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or even the lowest culpable mental state, criminal negligence.
Criminal negligence. That's basically failing to see a risk you should have seen, right? A really unreasonable failure.
Essentially, yes. A gross deviation from the standard of care a reasonable person would exercise. And it combines these mental states with 3 potential outcomes: causing serious bodily injury, causing serious mental deficiency or impairment, or causing just simple bodily injury.
So it's like a matrix. More intent plus more harm, a bigger penalty.
Exactly. It's hierarchical. If someone acts intentionally or knowingly and causes serious bodily injury or serious mental deficiency impairment to a child, elderly, or disabled person, that's immediately a felony of the first degree. Top-tier punishment.
Wow. But even the lower levels are serious, like criminal negligence.
Even acting with just criminal negligence, that failure to perceive a risk if it results in bodily injury to one of these protected individuals, it's still a state jail felony. That carries potential prison time, typically 180 days to 2 years.
What really stands out to me in this section is the idea of an omission. You can commit this crime by not doing something.
Yes, that's a crucial part of 22.04. An omission, a failure to act, can lead to criminal charges if 2 conditions are met.
What are they?
First, the actor must have had a legal or statutory duty to act, like a parent's duty to provide care for their child.
Okay.
Or second, the actor must have assumed care, custody, or control over the child, elderly, or disabled person.
How is assumed care defined? That sounds like it could cover a lot of situations.
It can. The statute in 22.04 defines it clearly. It means that through your actions, words, or just your pattern of behavior, you've caused a reasonable person to believe that you've taken responsibility for that vulnerable person's protection, food, shelter, or medical care.
So it's not just parents or legal guardians. It could be a boyfriend watching his girlfriend's child, or a neighbor who regularly brings meals to an elderly person next door.
Potentially, yes. If you step into that role where someone becomes dependent on you for basic needs or safety, and then you fail in that assumed responsibility leading to injury through your omission or negligence, you could be liable under this statute. It's aimed at preventing neglect in informal care situations, too.
The penalties are clearly designed to be severe across the board here.
Extremely severe. Even reckless conduct, not intentional, just reckless that results in serious injury, is still a second-degree felony, up to 20 years. The law sends a message that harming or neglecting these vulnerable groups will have heavy consequences.
Well, let's clarify who exactly is protected. Child is pretty straightforward, right?
Yes, a child is defined as 14 years of age or younger. Elderly individual is 65 years of age or older.
But the definition of disabled individual seems much broader and more nuanced.
It is. It reflects a more modern understanding of disability and vulnerability. It includes specific diagnoses like autism spectrum disorder, developmental disability, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, or mental illness.
But it goes beyond just listed diagnoses.
It does. Crucially, it also includes anyone who, because of age or physical or mental disease, defect, or injury, is substantially unable to protect themselves from harm or to provide for their own basic needs like food, shelter, or medical care.
So the focus is on the functional inability to care for oneself, regardless of the specific label.
Precisely. It ensures protection for anyone who is fundamentally dependent on others for their safety and well-being, whatever the underlying reason.
And there's a specific part targeting institutions like nursing homes, subsection A1.
Yes. This holds owners, operators, or employees of facilities like nursing homes, group homes, assisted living centers, etc. accountable. If they cause injury to a resident through an omission, like failing to provide necessary care, they're automatically considered to have assumed responsibility for that resident's care.
It tightens the accountability for professional caregivers.
Definitely. And that theme of failing to protect continues in the next section, 22.041, which covers abandoning or endangering a child or an elderly or disabled individual.
What does abandon mean legally here?
It means leaving that vulnerable person without providing the reasonable and necessary care they require, under circumstances where a reasonable person wouldn't leave them, essentially exposing them to an unreasonable risk of harm.
Okay. And endangering.
Endangering involves conduct, either doing something or failing to do something, an act or omission, that intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or with criminal negligence places that child, elderly, or disabled person in imminent danger of death, bodily injury, or physical or mental impairment.
The penalties here seem tied to the intent behind the abandonment, right?
They are. If you abandon someone but you intend to come back for them, it starts as a state jail felony.
But if you leave them with no intention of returning...
That bumps it up to a third-degree felony.
And if the act of abandoning them, regardless of intent to return, actually puts them in imminent danger of dying or getting seriously hurt...
Then it jumps higher again to a felony of the second degree. The level of immediate risk created dictates the higher penalty.
Now, there are some really specific drug presumptions in this section, too. In subsection C1, what are those about?
These are interesting. They create a legal presumption that an actor has endangered a child, elderly, or disabled person under certain drug-related circumstances.
Like what?
The law says endangerment is presumed if the person manufactured or even just possessed methamphetamine or certain other high-risk controlled substances like fentanyl analogs in Penalty Group 1B in the presence of that vulnerable individual.
Just having or making those drugs nearby creates the presumption?
Yes. And the presumption also applies if the actor's drug-related conduct leads to the vulnerable individual testing positive for those specific controlled substances.
So the law is essentially saying if you're involved with meth or these specific dangerous opioids around vulnerable people, we assume you're putting them in danger.
That's the practical effect. It reflects the extreme dangers associated with the manufacturing and use environments of these particular drugs, especially for children or dependent adults.
Okay, we've covered physical assaults, neglect, endangerment. Now we need to address a very specific and serious category. Offenses involving non-consensual sexual contact.
Right. We start with sexual assault, section 22.011. This covers the most serious offenses, generally involving penetration or specific types of sexual contact without the victim's consent.
And the baseline penalty for sexual assault is usually quite high?
Generally, yes. It typically starts as a felony of the second degree, 2 to 20 years.
For you listening, probably the single most critical concept to understand in this entire area is consent. Specifically, when is consent legally impossible, even if someone doesn't physically fight back or even says yes?
That's absolutely crucial. Section 22.01b lays out numerous situations where legally consent does not exist.
What are some key examples?
Well, the obvious ones first. If the actor compels submission using physical force, violence, or threats of violence or coercion.
Makes sense.
Also, if the victim is unconscious or physically unable to resist, or if they are mentally incapable of consenting due to a documented mental disease or defect.
What about being drunk or high? Does that negate consent?
It can. The law says consent is absent if the victim is intoxicated or impaired by any substance, alcohol, illegal drugs, even prescription medication, to the point where they are incapable of appraising the nature of the act. If they're too impaired to understand what's happening or make a rational decision, they cannot legally consent.
That's a really important clarification. Now, the law also talks about situations involving power dynamics, right? Where it's not about physical force, but exploitation of trust or authority.
Yes, this is a major focus of 22.011b, reflecting a modern understanding that coercion isn't always physical. Consent is negated if the actor exploits their position of power or trust.
What kinds of positions are specified?
It lists several. A public servant who misuses their official authority to coerce submission, a mental health or healthcare provider who exploits a patient's emotional dependency or therapeutic relationship.
So professionals taking advantage of their patients.
Exactly. It also specifically includes a clergyman exploiting emotional dependency related to their role as a spiritual advisor. And it covers a coach or tutor, exploiting a dependency created through their professional teaching or coaching relationship.
It seems the law recognizes that when someone is dependent on another person for their health, spirituality, education, or job, the concept of truly free consent becomes very questionable.
Precisely. The power imbalance itself can be coercive, and the law acknowledges that. That conduct becomes sexual assault due to the exploitation of the relationship, even without an overt physical threat.
Is there anything else notable in the consent section?
There's a very specific, relatively recent addition targeting misuse of reproductive material. If a healthcare provider facilitates reproduction using donor gametes without the patient's explicit consent to that specific donor or procedure.
Like using the wrong sperm or egg donor.
Yes, or perhaps their own without disclosure. That act is now specifically designated as a state jail felony under this section. It recognizes the profound violation of bodily autonomy involved in reproductive deception.
Okay, that's sexual assault. How is it different from indecent assault, section 22.012?
Indecent assault generally covers non-penetrative sexual contact, or contact involving specific bodily fluids done without consent. But there's a key additional element required here.
What's that?
The act must be done with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person. That specific sexual motivation has to be proven for indecent assault.
So what kind of acts fall under this?
The statute lists touching the anus, breast, or genitals of another person. It also includes causing someone else to touch your intimate areas, like genitals, pubic area, buttocks, or a female's areola.
And it mentions bodily fluids, too.
Yes, surprisingly for some. It includes causing another person, without their consent, to contact blood, seminal fluid, urine, or feces, if it's done with that specific intent to arouse or gratify sexual desire.
What's the typical penalty for indecent assault?
It generally starts as a Class A misdemeanor, so less severe initially than sexual assault.
But it can escalate.
Oh, yes. It escalates significantly in certain situations. For example, if the actor is a healthcare or mental health provider, and the indecent act happens during treatment, but is clearly outside the bounds of accepted medical practice, the charge gets bumped up.
And what about vulnerable victims? Does that apply here too?
Absolutely. If the victim of indecent assault is a disabled individual or an elderly individual, the charge jumps dramatically. It doesn't stay a misdemeanor. It becomes a felony of the second degree. 2 to 20 years.
Wow, same penalty range as baseline aggravated assault or sexual assault, just for indecent contact with those specific victims.
It shows the incredibly high level of protection the law affords to elderly and disabled individuals against any form of non-consensual sexual contact, even if not penetrative. There's also a recent change making it a third-degree felony if committed by someone in the civil commitment facility against an employee there.
Okay, we've navigated through various forms of physical and sexual assault, neglect, and endangerment. Let's wrap up by looking at offenses primarily centered on threats and specific types of harassment. This brings us back to terroristic threat, section 22.07.
Right. A terroristic threat isn't just any angry outburst. It specifically requires a threat of violence against a person or property, and it has to be coupled with one of several specific, serious intents.
What are those intents?
Well, one is intending to cause a reaction by an emergency agency, like calling in a fake bomb threat to cause evacuation. That's a Class B misdemeanor.
Okay. What's probably the most common use of this charge?
Intending to place any person in fear of imminent serious bodily injury, making a threat that makes someone genuinely afraid they're about to be severely hurt right now. That also starts as a Class B misdemeanor.
But I'm sensing a pattern. Does it escalate?
Of course. That Class B threat immediately becomes a Class A misdemeanor if the threat is directed at a family member or a public servant.
And if the victim is a peace officer or a judge?
Then it escalates further, becoming a state jail felony right off the bat. Again, higher protection for those roles.
Are there other intents that make a threat terroristic?
Yes. Intents focused on disrupting public order or services, like making a threat intended to interrupt or impair the use of a public place, like an airport, a government building, a public transit system, or interrupting public services like water or power.
What's the penalty for that?
It's generally a Class A misdemeanor. But if causing that interruption results in a significant financial loss, specifically a pecuniary loss over $1,500 to the owner of the interrupted service or place, then the threat becomes a state jail felony.
And the most serious type of terroristic threat?
That's reserved for threats intended to achieve broader, more disruptive goals, like intending to place the public, or a substantial group of the public, in fear of serious bodily injury, or making a threat specifically intended to influence the conduct or activities of a branch or agency of the federal government, the state, or a political subdivision.
So threats aimed at intimidating the government or causing widespread public fear.
Exactly. That level of threat is treated as a felony of the third degree. It's seen as an attack on public order and governmental function.
Okay. Now, there's a really specific and frankly disturbing offense called harassment by persons in certain facilities. Section 22.11, what does this cover?
This law targets a very particular type of conduct, usually occurring within jails, prisons, or civil commitment facilities.
What conduct?
It's when an individual who is incarcerated, confined, or civilly committed intentionally causes another person, typically an officer, employee, or contractor working at the facility, to come into contact with certain bodily fluids.
Which fluids?
The statute lists blood, seminal fluid, vaginal fluid, saliva, urine, or feces.
And the intent has to be harassment.
Yes, the act must be done with the intent to assault, harass, annoy, or embarrass the victim, using those bodily fluids as the means.
What's the penalty for that?
Given the setting and the nature of the act, it's taken very seriously. It's an automatic felony of the third degree. The law also applies this felony charge if someone not confined does the same thing to a public servant while they're on duty or in retaliation for their duty.
All right. One last crucial piece. Can you ever legally consent to being assaulted in Texas? Is that a defense? Section 22.06.
Yes, consent can be a defense, but, and this is a huge but only under very strict limitations.
What's the main limit?
The victim's effective consent is a defense to prosecution for assault, aggravated assault, or deadly conduct, only if the conduct did not threaten or inflict serious bodily injury.
So you can legally consent to, say, roughhousing that might cause minor pain or a bruise, simple bodily injury, but you cannot legally consent to actions that risk death, permanent disfigurement, or serious impairment, SBI.
That's the general rule. The law draws a line at serious harm. You can't consent to potentially lethal or permanently damaging violence.
Are there exceptions where consent is a defense even if SBI is risked?
Yes, a few specific scenarios. Consent remains a defense if the victim knew the conduct was a recognized risk of their job, like a boxer consenting to fight in the ring, or if it was recognized medical treatment performed properly, or part of a scientific experiment conducted legally.
So situations where the risk is inherent and understood, like sports or medicine.
Right. However, there's a significant counter-exception related to gangs.
What's that?
Consent is explicitly not a defense if the assault, even if it doesn't cause SBI, was required as a condition for joining or maintaining membership in a criminal street gang.
So the state won't recognize consent given under pressure for gang initiation rituals involving violence.
Exactly. It refuses to validate that type of coerced violence.
And finally, just a quick clarification point from Section 22.12 about unborn children.
Yes. The chapter makes clear that its assault provisions generally don't apply to acts committed by the mother of an unborn child. It also explicitly excludes lawful medical procedures performed by licensed professionals, including things like abortion or assisted reproduction, and also excludes the effects of lawfully prescribed medications.
So it carves out exceptions for the pregnant person's own actions and for legitimate medical care.
Correct. It ensures these necessary or personal actions aren't inadvertently criminalized under the assault statutes. Tag outro.
Wow. Okay, going through Chapter 22, this really highlights just how incredibly broad the legal concept of assault is in Texas. It's definitely not just one thing.
Not at all. It's this intricate sliding scale designed meticulously to account for almost every possible context surrounding violence or the threat of violence.
So if you had to distill it down, what's the biggest lesson for you, the listener, from this deep dive?
I think it boils down to understanding the two main drivers that escalate penalties throughout Chapter 22. First, the status of the victim. Are they specially protected because of their job, like a peace officer, their age, like a child or elderly person, or their relationship to the attacker, like a family member?
Victim status is key. What's the second driver?
The method of the attack or the nature of the conduct. Did it involve choking? Was a deadly weapon used or exhibited? Did it cause serious bodily injury? Or was it criminally negligent conduct directed at someone vulnerable? These factors dramatically increase the severity.
So what does this incredibly detailed, almost granular statute tell us overall? What's the point of all this complexity?
Well, the clear purpose is to provide heightened protection for specific groups the state considers particularly vulnerable or essential. Children, the elderly, disabled individuals, family members in domestic situations, public servants, emergency workers. The law uses carefully calibrated, often severe criminal penalties as a shield for these groups.
And the law isn't static, is it? You mentioned amendments, things effective even in 2025.
Exactly. If you look at the history of Chapter 22, it's constantly being tweaked, expanded, refined. New categories of victims get added. Specific actions like choking get singled out for higher penalties.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to chew on, something to consider after we sign off.
What is this continual process, this ongoing, detailed refinement and expansion of who counts as a protected victim and what actions trigger higher penalties? What does that tell us about how legal and societal views on protection and vulnerability are shifting over time?
It's like the penal code itself is a living document reflecting what or who society decides needs the strongest protection at any given moment.
It's definitely a reflection of evolving priorities and understanding of harm. A fascinating question to ponder.
Indeed. A great point to end on. Thank you for joining us for this very extensive deep dive into the Texas Penal Code's assaultive offenses.
We hope this breakdown was clear and helpful for you.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.